Hello and welcome back to the Threadheads podcast. I'm your host, Sanui, and today we are joined by the one, the only. Please welcome Kid Lightbulbs. How you doing, man?
Good. I just had my second cup of coffee of the day, so I'm all full of energy.
Wonderful. So
Thank
that
you for asking.
that caffeine has kicked in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kicking in here as well. So we're gonna get right into it.
Nice.
I'm very interested in how you started music because I saw that you have a music theory degree.
Yeah. I guess I've been playing music for like 30 years at this point. I started when I was four and a half, uh taking classical music lessons. My parents got me into piano very early. Um, and I guess I was pretty good. I formed some state competitions. I grew up in Connecticut in the US. And then when I was a teenager, I bailed on classical piano in a fit of teenage angst. Got really into like, alternative rock and metal and punk rock in the late 90s. And I got really into bands like Tool and Incubus and things like that. And I was always fascinated by the bass players. And I didn't know anybody at the time who had played bass guitar. So I uh, got like a $120 Ibanez bass at the local music store and kind of taught myself bass. And then a couple years later, I met some buddies of in high school, and we formed what was basically my first band. Um, we were called Bushwhack. We just did like weird off the wall instrumental prog rock stuff because we were all into like a bunch of different a bunch of different stuff. I grew up listening to a lot of Beatles and then a lot of like 70s classic rock, which kind of moved into prog rock, like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson. Those guys were big into like new metal at the time, Metallica, a lot of symphonic metal. We all kind of got into Dream Theater at the same time. And we just played just like bonkers prog rock. And I was in that band for about 5 years. We were called Bushwhack. Um, Myself and two of the other bandmates, we all went to school for music. I came up to Boston where I live. I've been kind of around Boston most of my adult life. And I went to school for music. I have a degree in music theory and composition with a music industry minor. And I was kind of trying to, get a job writing songs or for a record label or maybe working in a recording studio or something. I learned a lot of like production and kind of sound design throughout that program as well. But I was in school kind of like in the middle of the 2008 housing and economic recession in the US. Also, piracy, music downloading, like kind of decimated the music industry during that period. Spotify was sort of around, but really just in Europe and didn't really blow up to be the monster that it is today. So I was just kind of like freaking out in terms of like what to do for a career. So I got really lucky and found this like music booking startup in the US that I worked at just as an intern, kind of answering phones and stuff like that for a little while. But it kind of gradually pushed me into a tech career. So I've been kind of doing that off to the side. Left the band for a bunch of reasons, creative differences being one of them. Went and did this tech thing for a while, kind of gradually, slowly playing in bands here and there, making some music on and off. Um, and then kind of just let my career and relationship, now marriage, kind of take a lot of priority in my life, and always had music going on in the background but didn't really do a whole lot with it. I had like multiple albums that I was like putting together slowly, and just between lack of time, imposter syndrome and things like that, kind of just put them on the internet and no one noticed. um And then when COVID hit, I kind of started revisiting a lot of my old, yeah, theory background, a lot of my old sessions. I started writing again much more like prolifically. Having a kid kind of did that. I just had a lot of stuff to get out. And then I started like, writing a lot, producing. I kind of figured out a bunch of things with like my sounds that I had been like kind of slowly chipping away and tinkering at over the years. And then decided to start like releasing it. And really only in the last like 6, 7 months have I really started like actively promoting it, doing something with it. But I guess that's everything. Hey, I was a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's sort of where I started music and how it got me all the way here, like 30 years later.
Yeah, that's quite a story. Believe it or not, I had Spotify in 2008.
Yeah, you're one of the you're in Europe, right? Like
Yeah.
so you probably had a lot more access to it than we did in the States.
Yeah, it's from Sweden,
Hmm.
where I'm from as well. So
Okay, so you're in Sweden too. Nice.
yeah. Um I wanted to ask, so you took lessons at when you were 4 years old, or started when you were four, yeah?
Yeah.
Um, because I have this, I don't know if it's a misconception, but do do kids want to play instrument at that age?
I I feel like it probably depends on who you ask. I feel like without getting into like therapy adjacent territory, I feel like it was sort of a mix of me being really into music. I think I mentioned this, but like I had my parents, my aunt and family members like constantly playing like music around me. And so I also have perfect pitch. So I was like picking up on like notes and kind of just the general kind of like contour of songs pretty early. So I think I like showed a knack for it. But I think my parents like really were kind of like nudging me to it. Um, which is why I think after a while I just kind of angstily quit lessons and it took me a while to get back to like I there was like a good 10-year gap where I basically just like didn't play piano much and then came back to it like by nature of the band I mentioned I was in. So I think it's probably a mix. Like it's always been part of my life, but it was a little bit I don't want to say forced on me, but um there's definitely like a
Encouraged.
nudging that happened. Yeah, heavily encouraged.
Yeah.
At that time, I feel like a lot of 90s kids, were sort of encouraged to do a lot of activities, whether it was music or sports or whatever. So yeah, it was definitely encouraged.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish my parents were like that. Was always not a lot of not a lot of people in my family are very musical in that sense. My brother played drums for a bit, and
Mhm.
my sister plays a little bit of piano. Recently started, and then there's me. Um, so you play several instruments, right?
Yeah.
You talked about you played bass as well, yeah?
Yeah. So I started on piano, picked up bass, kind of gradually sort of picked up guitar. Like I'm a terrible guitar player, and I'm definitely a bass player first. So when I play guitar, it's usually like bad soloing or like walking like you would a bass or power chords, bar chords, things like that. Um, in middle school, I was in like the middle school concert band, so I like learned trombone for a bit, and then when there was too many too many trombone players and not a single tuba player, I was sort of pressured into picking up tuba. So I spent a year playing the tuba. Um, I have a couple like percussion instruments scattered around the house. Now my daughter likes to play them. Um, but I am a terrible drummer also. Um, trying to think if there's anything else. That's pretty much it. I mostly just record into the laptop top and use the laptop as an instrument.
Yeah, it's amazing what we can do these days. Um, on one side, it's amazing that you just need a MIDI keyboard more or less, or you just a fucking laptop
Oh
keyboard,
yeah.
and you
Oh
can do
yeah. Like
a bunch of
this thing is
things.
a drum kit as much as it is a piano.
Yeah, that's the thing. Um, what I realized a bit into my journey is you can't replace feel. That's something
Yeah.
you can program it, but you can't replace it really.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I bought a bass, um, a Hofner Ignition like the Beatles bass.
Hmm.
um, which is one of my very prized possessions. I'm absolutely in love with that thing, and
Nice.
I get so excited every time someone brings up bass because it's probably my favorite instrument.
I feel like there's a lot, and maybe this is just like the filter of like the music community on Threads, but I feel like there are a lot of bass players and like bass appreciators more so than like any other community that I've like found in music. I don't know what it is about it.
Yeah, I think it's well, I don't know. I've never really been in a different music community, but I feel like in general it's an instrument that is kind of slept on in terms of its effect on a song.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
because a cool bass line, a cool bass fill, yeah, I'll take that 7 days a week. Um, so how did you find learning bass while translating piano skills to a bass? What was challenging for you?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. I think um I think I kind of just like started with like just jamming on it and figuring it out. Like I probably don't have good like bass, technique. I kind of just like play what I know. I mentioned this already, but I grew up with a lot of like metal and punk rock that I was listening to, so I often play with a pick. I was big into Primus for a while, so I like tried to do like the flamenco style thing that Les Claypool does. And I'm not good at it by any means, but I feel like I just kind of would watch videos and try and emulate it more than, like translate what I was doing on the piano. Because they do have like very different feels. Like all I if I'm writing a track with a bass line, even if it's like a synth bass, I'll usually kind of like mock it up on a bass guitar. Um, Whereas like I use piano for like chords and melodies. They're almost like completely mutually exclusive in a way for me.
Yeah, I used to program MIDI basses like on a piano or keyboard, I
Mhm.
should say, and then try to learn it on the bass and try to play it in and record it that way. But lately, I found myself to jump that step and just go straight to the bass and see what comes out of it really.
Yeah.
Um, but I found that very challenging in the beginning because you have a piano roll, but that I even have like a MIDI bass that even says where to press on the neck, but the way it translates it's usually just one string, and that's normally not always what sounds the best in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and yeah, about the guitar playing that you mentioned, I'm very much in the same boat. I can play a few melodies. You know, I can pick a little bit, um, make a few riffs, but strumming is something I find very difficult, like unbelievably difficult. Like I wouldn't imagine that would be the difficult thing on a guitar, because it's how much pressure you're applying your wrist, the angle of the fucking pick. It's so
Yeah.
many factors.
Yeah. I hear that. I don't think I have so much of trouble with strumming. I think I don't know why, but I think I just like I at least figured out a strumming technique that works for me. I don't know if it's any good for what it's worth, because I'm also self-taught on guitar. But what I struggle with is, which is weird because I'm a pianist first. Like I hear chords, but I really struggle with voicing them in only my left hand on the fretboard. So I usually just fall back to like the simplest like voicings or bar chords that I can figure out. But I kind of just make that work for me.
Yeah. No, I look up chords all the time. Literally all the time. All my tabs are just chords. And
Because I don't. If I find like a chord that I want to voice, but I like can't figure it out, I'll usually just go back to piano um instead of trying to make it work on the guitar. And that is like a big influence on like my production decisions on the songs I write.
yeah. Yeah, it's I look I usually look up
Oh no, I just
diff
lost audio for some reason.
You got it?
Yeah, it's back.
All
Sorry,
right,
I don't know what
cool.
to
No worries, no worries.
say.
We'll cut that out. Um, yeah, the thing I was starting to look at is inversions on guitar,
Mm,
especially because then you sort of cover the voicing aspect as you would on a piano in a sense, depending if it's easy to hold the position and stuff like that.
yeah.
But yeah, and then I started to look at the cage system as well. This is pretty good. Um, but let's see. So the music theory school, how many years did you study?
Um, I went to a 4-year program in college, or university. Um, and then I mean I like picked up some music theory in like high school, before going into college. Like I there was a bunch of sort of creative curriculum in my high school. And unfortunately, I think in America, public education, a lot of that's going away. But I had, I think, 2 years of theory kind of classes there, and then the 4-year program in school. But I honestly like picking up a lot from classical like training earlier in my life. Like you kind of jump in kind of half knowing a bunch of it already just by kind of absorption. So I feel like I've kind of been like slowly building up a theory knowledge like my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's people I've spoken to, I see a lot of people online doesn't seem to value theory uh, in a wider spectrum. So, what's your take on you on how much how much one needs theory?
Yeah. If I'm honest, I don't honestly think it matters a whole lot. I think of it as a tool in the tool set, or like reference material that you can choose to use or not use. I like it because it helps me make sense of it gives me options if I'm like writing and I want to figure out a way to kind of resolve one section of a song into another section of a song. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, some of which are very rooted in like, like Baroque era classical music. There's more kind of modern romantic era ways. There's very bizarre atonal ways of resolving that. And like just knowing the options and having a sort of reason to pick one option over another, depending on like what you're trying to achieve in the song. That is helpful for me. I think it just like speeds me up rather than having to sort of like try a bunch of different approaches, potentially like taking a lot of time to try and like decide between a lot of different approaches, or not really knowing why I made a decision. I think it also that's the other kind of end of it where I think theory is helpful is like knowing why I decided to resolve this chord to that chord. Um, because it maybe like it resolves tension, but in a more uneasy way, in an unsettling way, rather than just like the typical, like 5-1 that um someone else might use. So I like when someone says they don't know theory, like I honestly just don't care. Like I don't care whether you know theory or not at all. It has no bearing on my opinion of you as a musician or the quality of your songs. It sometimes helps me make sense of your songs. And it sometimes helps me if someone says like it tries to sort of explain a transition for it like in their song, or the structure or the chord progression of a song. Like I find it interesting and I like talking about it. Um, but it doesn't really matter to me, honestly. It's a tool in my tool set.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, yeah, I've only found the trial and error period to be a little bit less time consuming. But
Hmm.
then again, you can imagine, people that doesn't knowingly use theory they might have more happy accidents in a sense, with
Yeah.
maybe some modal mixtures that they're not aware of that they're doing, and things like
Yeah.
that. Whereas
Yeah.
whereas I need to use a bit more intention with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it also depends on like the extent of theory that you know or don't know. And sort of I guess I'll say how much practice you have with letting it go if you do want to have happy accidents. I think it also depends on the style of music you're trying to write. A lot of my music is really influenced by minimalism, like 20th century, like Steve Reich, Philip Glass kind of minimalism. So a lot of it just kind of like stays in a tonal space and kind of just slowly develops over time. So a lot of my happy accidents are less in like the chord structures and more in like the production decisions I make. Or they're like more slow, kind of gradual builds. But I think if you're making something a little bit more, bonkers, avant-garde, it helps to throw caution to the wind a little bit. I think that's a big part of it. It kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve with your music. I also, frankly, wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people don't really think about too much what they're trying to achieve and kind of just go for a vibe. And in that case, like it's kind of it's kind of at your discretion whether you think you're meeting the vibe or not. And kind of theory almost doesn't matter to me as much in that case.
Yeah, some might even call it pure talent.
Hmm. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you're trying to hit a vibe and it really resonates with people, I would say that's talent, like innate talent, whether you can explain it or not. It's almost it almost like doesn't matter. I think it's interesting if you can explain it, but it doesn't really matter to me if you can't.
Yeah. Now, since we're on this topic, you mentioned the Beatles. I'm currently on a big Beatles binge. Um, Going through their recording equipment, checking what kind of stuff they have on Abbey Road and, what kind of methods they use,
Mhm.
how much mono or stereo and all that kind of stuff, all the nerdy stuff, really. How much theory do you think they applied intentionally in their songwriting?
I mean, I would honestly bet very little. If anything, a lot of it came from George Martin, like their producer. Um, I mean, we know for a fact that Paul McCartney still to this day like doesn't know how to read sheet music, so I doubt he's applying theory. It's a lot of I would bet it's a lot of feel, if I'm honest. And I think that translates mostly with like Paul and John stuff. George, I'm a little bit less sure of. I George seems like he probably has a little bit more of a like a almost like an academic approach to the way he like structures his chords and builds his songs. But a lot of John's stuff is purely like it's a lot based in blues, which blues theory is very different than like classical theory. Like if you listen to Plastic Ono Band or even Imagine, like it's very different kind of writing than like George's and Paul's. Paul's is interesting because I honestly don't know how he came up with some of the ideas that he has. Like two of my favorite Beatles songs are Happiness is a Warm Gun and Martha My Dear, both off the White Album. I think they're actually back to back. Like the second half of the first album of the White Album is like probably my favorite like suite of music like ever. And oh, there's my dog. Um, I don't know how Paul McCartney came up with Martha My Dear, because the chord movements in that song, like I'm sure he didn't come up with the string arrangement. I'm pretty sure that was all George Martin, but I honestly don't know how he came up with it. And it's almost like so complicated that it has to have been by feel, rather than with any particular theoretical knowledge. Um, yeah, McCartney just kind of blows my mind in that way, like how he was able to like come up with something like Martha My Dear without knowing like how to read music or any conventional music theory. I have to imagine he had maybe a little help from George Martin, but that's an example, I think, of what you said before of like that's just talent. Like he has something in his ear and it just comes out, and he knows his way around his instruments well enough that he's able to do it. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Get Back documentary, but people keep talking about how he came up with the whole idea for Get Back in a matter of like 10 seconds, just sitting in front of his amp playing the guitar. Um, I mean, Get Back's a lot simpler of a song than Martha My Dear. Um, but yeah, I think it just comes out of him. I don't know how.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting with that band. Um, I find it funny that they're very quick to point out each other's mistake though,
Yeah.
during the recording, without knowing any theory. Now, what was I gonna ask? Slipped my mind. Yeah, it was. way down the Beatles rabbit hole. Yeah, I think their superpower as a band, I think it was the fact that they experimented a lot with
Yes.
everything really, and they were a lot of a lot way ahead of their time in a sense, and really at the cutting edge of technology.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing I find very pleasing and very interesting is Paul McCartney, like the way his bass lines just develop over time, and just how, if you listen really closely, because in the beginning when you have the mono records, everything that was released in mono, you can really hear his bass lines, and then people were surprised when you can actually hear that he's one hell of a bass player.
Oh yeah, he's a ridiculous bass player.
Yeah, no, I think he mixes the percussive, rhythmic, and melodic style very, very well.
Yeah.
Um, Something that I don't know of too many great bass players in the modern era, but yeah, I feel like very many are inspired by him, but I think very few uh, would hold up to his level.
Yeah, especially considering his songwriting ability and frankly the fact that he can somehow sing and do it at the same time. Like I don't know how he's able to do that, honestly. I think I mentioned Les Claypool earlier. I think he can get there, but he sings very different and plays very differently than McCartney. Um there are some very good bass players in punk bands, like I forget the guy's name in Rancid. Also very good, very like walking melodic bass lines for punk music. There's this Swedish band that I'm very into right now, a punk band called Viagra Boys. Terrible name, but amazing band, and their bass player is like probably I would argue making some of the best bass lines in rock music right now. And similarly very just like melodic and driving, a lot of it's running through like an overdrive or something. It just sounds so good. Highly recommend them if you're looking for a new band to check out if you don't know them already.
Yeah, funny enough, my brother recommend them to me,
Oh,
and
nice.
and he was the one that told me they were Swedish actually.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
so
their singer's American, like he's an American expat in Sweden, and yeah, they're really, really good.
yeah, so yeah, it's fun talking the Beatles actually. Um, but we're gonna move on from the Beatles for at least a bit. Um,
Yeah.
so what do you feel is the biggest benefit of knowing fairy?
Um, I think it's what I said before. It's like being able to like rationalize your decisions as a musician and like have options to evaluate rather than just kind of having to go purely on feel or yeah, just like experiment constantly. What you said about the Beatles, like they were able to afford the time, they had the budget to be able to experiment, and not just in the way of like song of sound and production, but also in terms of song structure. Like I don't have that time. I have a very busy life, and I don't really have a lot of time bandwidth to just like sit and experiment. I do, like I'll just kind of noodle on a piano, but I think it theory allows me to accelerate the process a little bit by kind of like knowing more naturally like where my hand should go on a keyboard, based on, my understanding of chord structures, my understanding of different, styles and tonalities, modalities. Um, that's probably the most useful part about it for me.
Yeah, and they spent like 12, 14 hours a day in the studio.
Yeah,
Like
that's
that.
that's time I just simply do not have.
Yeah, I mean, they have to take some breaks, I believe, just to
Yeah,
refresh the airs. But yeah, no wonder they were so experimental when they have four crazy, crazy good musicians in the same room and just
yeah.
working
Four
off each
four
other's energy.
crazy, yeah, four crazy good musicians with like years and years of time put in to become crazy good musicians. with the best studio, equipment setup like you could possibly have, and the like, frankly, like the budget and the financial incentive to experiment. Like that's at one point or another, like after they put out Revolver, like that's just like what they were doing. Like that was it was their livelihood, it was their passion, but it was also their job. Like they did that for a living.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. Um, do you have a favorite modal mixture?
I mean, I think it depends on the day, the mood. I really enjoy writing a lot in major keys or like modes that are pretty adjacent to major keys, but with like a bit of a dark bent to them. Like my one of my songs, Trendsetters, probably my favorite song that I've written, is all in Mixolydian G. So basically G major, but with a flat seven. Um, I really like that one a lot. It's a little bluesy, it's a little like optimistic, but you can kind of make it dark if you want to. Um, I play a lot with kind of oscillating between major and minor, kind of equivalents of either the same key or closely related keys. Um, back when I was in like high school and a little bit angstier time in my life, I would write a lot in like Phrygian and Dorian, just like pretty close to minor keys. I'm not really doing that so much anymore. It's not really the style I like. But I used to do quite a bit of that. I also I come back every once in a while to like pure, like 12 tone scale, like really like atonal, like earlier 20th century avant-garde stuff. I have a couple I kind of demos of things I might put out later this year that kind of just are really bonkers atonal stuff that I'm going to try and convince are more pop music.
That's the end of part one. Thank you so much for watching. Uh, Maybe subscribe.
I never know what to say, but I know how to take it, 'cause I can't keep up, keep up. I never know what to say, but I know how to take it, 'cause I can't keep up, keep up. You never know when to run, when to shut you down. It's strength in numbers.